March is National Women's History Month.
This month, KX News is honoring local women who lead and inspire every day.
However, we're also talking about women in history who have forged the way for our future.
Berg's 24-hour towing and crane service, Space and Electric Power Cooperative, and MHA Nation Interpretive Center proudly recognize all local remarkable women.
When I think back about Sacagawea's story, I see her as being one of the most culturally enlightened women of her time.
Though not everyone agrees on how to say her name, Amy Mossett says Sacagawea's name comes from the words spoken by the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes.
Bird in Hidatsa is Sacagawea is our word, the Hidatsa word for woman. So we called her Bird Woman.
Mossett says Sacagawea went by a different name before she came to the Hidatsa tribe. And while many people call her Sacagawea, Mossett says the J was a mistake by an editor.
Nicholas Biddle put the J in her name. And so people ask about the spelling, but the spelling is not that important because our lake here in North Dakota is spelled with 2 Ks. That is pronounced Sacagawea. And that's a linguistic spelling, and it was spelled with the 2 Ks just to make sure that people didn't put that J sound in her name.
Sacagawea was a Shoshone woman who was believed to be captured at a young age. Much of her life remains a mystery, but Sacagawea would later marry Toussaint Charbonneau, who many believe brought her to the Mandan Hidatsa tribes in early 1800s.
And so she'd been living here among the Hidatsa and probably learning a lot, learning the language, learning the lifestyle, which was very different. She would have learned about the social and the ceremonial organization among the Hidatsa, maybe a little bit about the Mandan, but more so the Hidatsa.
Because of her knowledge about the tribes, Sacagawea was appointed by President Thomas Jefferson to join the Lewis and Clark expedition, mapping a northwest passage to the Pacific Ocean. Their journey began in 1804. However, Lewis and Clark met Sacagawea in 1805 in North Dakota. Mossett says the girl was only 16 or 17 years old when she made the trip down the Missouri River.
And Sacagawea joined this expedition, this group of men, and endured all of the hardships, the elements, the wild animals, the flash floods, the weather. She suffered through everything they suffered through, but what's extraordinary is that she was a young woman.
Not only was she a young woman, but she was also carrying a young infant at the time. When she returned in 1806, her son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, was a toddler.
Sacagawea went along to be an interpreter, and she was a very key link in that chain of communication between the Lewis and Clark expedition and all of the tribal nations that they encountered from here all the way out perhaps to the Columbia Plateau.
She not only served as an interpreter, but she was also there to help point out important landmarks and shared her knowledge. Her and her child also served as a sign of peace as Lewis and Clark continued on their journey.
And just the presence of Sacagawea and her child in the Lewis and Clark expedition really reconciled to all these tribal nations who had never encountered any Americans, that they definitely were not a war party, that they were not hostile because they had a young woman and a child.
Sacagawea is thought to be the first woman to travel the entire length of the Missouri River. Her journey with Lewis and Clark forged the future. If Lewis and Clark never met Sacagawea in North Dakota, we would have never known her. Many believe she died at 25 in North Dakota, but Sacagawea remains one of the most celebrated women in America. From statues to Navy ships named after her, she has more monuments named after her than any other woman in American history. And she will forever be remembered as an inspiration to all young women today.
The landscapes that she saw, the people she encountered, the languages that she heard, it's extraordinary. And I think that it's important for all of us to maintain a really positive sense of adventure and curiosity, because that's what makes us all more enlightened people.
And that's why Sacagawea will forever be remembered as a remarkable woman.
Sacagawea had 2 children who were later adopted by William Clark.
Amy Mossette gives her own interpretations at the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial of what she thinks Sacagawea's time here in North Dakota looked like, according to her own knowledge.
She says that educating younger generations about history is important because there is a lot to be proud of, but also makes us better for the future.
Now